about the volume of applications for purpose-built student accommodation where there is saturation? And does he agree that there should be some right to challenge the over-provision that doesn't exist now?
Minister.
Well, as already indicated, the local authorities, Glasgow included, have got the ability to identify areas where they think areas of concentration would further development would undermine residential amenity. That power already exists. There's clearly also the power for local communities to produce local place plans to feed into local development plans. But I think it's also true to recognise, I think the member does, that students studying at our colleges and universities are a hugely important part of society. I want to welcome international students and to make provision for them, and any provision in the PBS issue space obviously takes pressure off the private rented sector, which I think we would also agree is to be welcome.
Brief supplementary, Ben Macpherson.
Of course, we want to support our students and welcome those from abroad, but I do think it's time to signal to PBSA developers that their plans are increasingly unwelcome in communities like those I represent. In my constituency and in Edinburgh as a whole, there is increasing concern with the amount of PBSA being built in our capital city, especially when there is an acute housing emergency. In many instances, PBSA extracts money out of Scotland, sometimes into tax havens, and uses up valuable urban land where normal housing should be being built instead. Therefore, I urge the Scottish Government to work with City of Edinburgh Council to restrict future PBSA development if possible, and its often in corporate exploitation of students and Scotland's urban land.
Minister.
What I would say is that the point I made earlier, we want to provide accommodation for students, and I think the case would be that where there is PBSA, that would indeed take pressure off private rented and other parts of the market. But as already indicated, local authorities already have the power to be able to identify areas where they feel that further development would undermine residential amenity and to build that into their local development plans. And of course, planning is delegated to local authorities in that regard.
Question number 3, Sue Webber.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government when it plans to undertake a regulatory check of existing Transport Scotland Act 2001 powers to allow local authorities and regional transport partnerships to implement local road user charging schemes.
Cabinet Secretary Fiona Hislop.
On the 12th of June, the Scottish Government published the Car Use Reduction Policy Statement jointly with COSLA, which includes a commitment to a regulatory check of existing discretionary powers for local road user charging schemes under the Transport Scotland Act 2001. It was published jointly by me and Councillor Gail McGregor as COSLA leader on the Environment and Transport, who someone Sue Webber will be familiar with as she is a member of her own political party. The Scottish Government will now establish a working group that will include membership from regional transport partnerships and local authorities, including those who have been seeking progress on such a regulatory check to ensure secondary legislation from back in 2001 remains fit for purpose, as of course any such road user charging would only happen if councils wanted to use those 2000 powers themselves. The work of that group will inform a timeline for the check.
Whoever.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary, and to remind you that Gail McGregor was speaking on behalf of COSLA, not on behalf of the Conservative Party. So after being forced to scrap its 2030 car use target, the SNP now plans to continue its war on motorists by charging them for using our pothole-ridden roads. To reduce car use, we should be providing efficient and affordable public transport alternatives. Yet under SNP control, ScotRail is deterring passengers by cutting services and packing commuters like sardines into their carriages. So does the Cabinet Secretary accept that the Scottish Government need to focus on incentives rather than penalties to encourage Scots to leave their cars at home?
Thank you. Always through the Chair, colleagues.
So I wasn't forced to change that 20% car reduction by 2030. I said it was unachievable and not wanted. Indeed, the Climate Change Committee have said that Scotland would only need to reduce its car use by 6% by 2035. Now, some parts of Scotland may want to go further, and we may need to go further as part of our climate change plan. But in terms of how we shift, that's why we have a big focus on how we provide our public transport services. And under public ownership, ScotRail is one of the top performing rail services in the UK, with more passengers and also more frequency efficiency and more services than before public ownership took place. So in terms of our investment and our support for public transport, I agree with her. We need to have accessible, affordable transport for people to use. But actually, if we're serious about climate change, and I don't think the Conservative Party is anymore, we have to make sure that we take steps to protect our environment, protect people in terms of the car use, encourage them to use EVs, but also invest in our public transport system.
Thank you. Question number 4, Graham Simpson.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government whether it has plans to reform the planning appeals process.
Minister Ivan McKee.
The Scottish Government has no current plans to reform the planning appeals process, which it considers to be robust, fair and efficient.
Graham Simpson.
Well, can I thank the Minister for that brief answer? He will know that there have been concerns expressed in Parliament about the planning appeals system, which allows one unelected official to overturn decisions taken by elected councillors. We've recently had a development in North Lanarkshire at Woodhull and Faskin, which was rejected, quite rightly, by North Lanarkshire councillors on the detailed advice of planners. Now, the applicant in that case could appeal, and that decision could be overturned by one person, a Scottish Government reporter. Does the Minister not accept that that is fundamentally wrong, and would he agree to review the system?
Minister.
No, I wouldn't agree with that. I think, obviously, I can't comment on any individual cases, but the right to appeal is a long-standing and important feature of the planning system. All appeals are determined on their own merits and on the same legal basis as a planning application in accordance with the development plan, unless material considerations indicate otherwise. And parties who have made representations on an application are given the opportunity to confirm their objection or support if it goes to appeal. So, as I say, that's a well-established part of our system, and I would not want to take steps to change that. Question number 5, Colin Beattie.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the aim under Action 20 of the Housing to 2040 strategy to streamline and accelerate the adaptation system.
Cabinet Secretary Mary McCallan.
Presiding Officer, this Government is committed to ensuring that older and disabled people in Scotland have choice, dignity and freedom to access suitable homes, to enable them to participate as the full and equal citizens that they are. Adaptations play a vital role in this, which is why we have more than doubled our Registered Social Landlords Adaptations Programme budget to £20.9 million for this financial year. My officials have begun engaging with stakeholders and are working on setting the scope and timescales for the piece of work Mr Beattie refers to, and I'll be glad to update him when this is finalised.
Colin Beattie.
Thank you for that response. The gaps in legislation has left a number of my constituents in dire circumstances. Can the Cabinet Secretary confirm if the review will be completed by the end of this parliamentary term, and if she plans to meet particularly with stakeholders in the park home sector?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the exact timescales for the review are still to be agreed, and I mentioned that my officials are meeting with a number of stakeholders as the work develops, but I hear the urgency that Mr Beattie is applying to the issue, and I will bear that in mind as we progress. On the issue of park homes, we're committed to making sure that such residents have appropriate rights and protections. I would encourage anyone that requires an adaptation, including those living in park homes, to engage with their local authority, and would urge all local authorities to make sure that they are providing support under existing provisions.
Question number 6, Keith Brown.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and my apologies for not being here at the start of this session. To ask the Scottish Government what discussions it has had with the NHS Forth Valley regarding access to health services for communities that rely on local bus links.
Mr Jenny Minto.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government meets regularly with NHS Forth Valley to discuss health services. We expect NHS boards to consider the needs of their communities, including ensuring access to healthcare. Where an NHS board is subsidising a bus service, as it is in this case here, I would expect them to work closely with the operator and the local authority to ensure the service continues to meet the ongoing needs of the community.
Keith Brown.
Can Can I thank the Minister for her answer? When the decision was made to site the new Forth Valley Royal Hospital in Larbert, Forth Valley Health Board gave a clear and binding commitment that accessible public transport would be maintained for all communities. And that commitment, and I know because I was there, was critical in securing public support at that time, and successive health secretaries have recognised and reinforced the expectation that it must be upheld. But now many of my constituents in Clackmannanshire are deeply concerned about the recent removal of key stops on the H1 and H2 bus routes, lifeline services for elderly, disabled and carless patients who rely on them to attend essential appointments. Will the Minister join me in making clear to NHS Forth Valley that they are obliged to sustain the original commitment, and that she will personally instruct the Board, as previous health ministers have done, to take urgent steps to ensure that no vulnerable patient is left without a reliable route to care?
Minister.
I thank Keith Brown for his question. The Scottish Government knows that transport plays an important role in supporting patients' health journeys. Removing transport and other barriers will help ensure that patients across Scotland are able to access the right care in the right place and at the right time. And with the specifics of Forth Valley, I would be very happy to write to NHS Forth Valley within this regard.
Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Clackmannanshire Council, together with local groups, have voiced strong opposition to the proposed changes, emphasising the importance of maintaining a reliable bus service to the hospital at Forth Valley and Larbert. These are serious concerns, and the changes could negatively impact on elderly and disabled who rely upon the existing bus routes. So what additional support is the Scottish Government considering, and what is it doing to ensure that Forth Valley assist these vulnerable individuals?
Minister.
I thank Alexander Stewart for his question and agree that the point of having good, reliable transport to health services helps everyone, which is why, as I have indicated to Mr Brown, that I will write to NHS Forth Valley to underline the importance of their investment decision in transport within the Forth Valley Hospital area.
Question number 7, Mark Griffin.
Presiding Officer, to ask the Scottish Government what health policies it has in place to support the neurodevelopment of children born prematurely through their early years and adolescence.
Minister Jenny Minto.
In Scotland, babies who have been in neonatal care receive a developmental assessment at 2 years of corrected age as part of a routine follow-up. This assessment is crucial for identifying any developmental delays or potential problems early on. The assessment is typically a face-to-face appointment and is usually conducted by a multidisciplinary team. The Scottish Government has also set out standards for services to support children and young people who have neurodevelopmental profiles with support needs in the National Neurodevelopmental Specification. This specification aims to ensure that children and families receive the supports and access to services that meet their needs at the earliest opportunity based on the GIRFEC approach.
Mark Griffin.
I thank the Minister for that response. We know that children born prematurely have a higher risk of being neurodivergent. Can I ask what cross-government work takes place, particularly between health and education, to support those born prematurely, since up to 3 children in every Scottish primary school class will have been born prematurely? And will the Scottish Government commit to providing guidance for public service providers who work with children to become prem-aware, to spot the signs of neurodevelopmental delay early and help ensure appropriate support is in place for those children?
Minister.
I thank Mark Griffin for his follow-up question, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank him for the work that he does specifically in this area. I had the pleasure of meeting with Sarah Brown and James Boardman to learn about the work that their World Edinburgh Birth Consort is doing, and it's a 25-year study now into year 7, actually following the progress that neonatal babies have taken. And I think that's a really important piece of study to support work in health, social care and education. If I can come back to Mr Griffin with regards to the detail of his question, I'd be very happy to do. But from my perspective, it has to be a collaborative, multidisciplinary team approach, as I indicated in my first answer.
Question number 8, Marie McNair.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how it's working with NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde to meet the demand for ADHD and autism assessments.
Mr Tom Arthur.
Scottish Government has allocated £3.1 billion to NHS Greater and Glasgow Clyde in this financial year. NHS boards, along with local partners, are responsible for prioritising funding to ensure that their local neurodivergent population receives the support they need at the right time and in the right place. To support this, we have commissioned the National Autism Implementation Team to support local health partners and NHS boards, including Greater Glasgow and Clyde, to develop, enhance and redesign existing local adult neurodevelopmental services to meet local needs. We are also working closely with health boards and local authorities towards implementing the National Neurodevelopmental Specification for children and young people.
Marie McNair.
I thank the Minister for that response. I have a case in my constituency of a child who has been waiting for 3 years and 8 months for the ADHD assessment, and this is extremely concerning, and by the time that they get that, they'll be in 17, and it's most likely they'll be then going to leave school. Can the Minister further comment on what more can be done to support children who are facing excessive waiting times?
Minister.
Well, can I thank Marie McNair for raising this important issue and say that I do recognise there has been a significant increase in children and families seeking support and diagnosis for their neurodivergence, and that this is creating challenges for a range of services. But support should be put in place to meet a child's needs rather than be dependent on formal diagnosis. That includes support in schools. Local authorities have duties under the Additional Support for Learning Act 2004 to identify and provide for the additional needs of their pupils. An additional support need can arise for any reason, and a diagnosis of ADHD is not required before support is put in place.
Thank you. That concludes general questions. The next item of That concludes general questions. Next item of business is First Minister's questions, and at question number 1 I call Russell Finlay.
Thank you, President Officer. 1 in 3 cancer patients in Scotland don't begin to receive treatment within the government's target time. I'm going to repeat that for the First Minister's benefit. 1 in 3 cancer patients are not receiving treatment when they need it. And in one health board, NHS borders, fewer than half begin treatment within the 62-day target. For NHS Grampian, it's almost as bad. And behind these new and bleak statistics are real people. For them and their families, the SNP's culture of failure can be the difference between life and death. Does John Swinney accept that this is unacceptable? And what will he do to meet cancer treatment times?
First Minister.
President Officer, before I answer Mr Finlay's question, could I acknowledge the announcement that you made at the weekend, Presiding Officer, of your intention not to seek re-election to Parliament at the next election, express my appreciation to your leadership in Parliament as Presiding Officer. In relation to the issue on cancer waiting times, Mr Finlay raises a serious and important issue, and I want to begin by expressing my regret that the cancer waiting times are in all circumstances not being achieved around the country. The 31-day target, which is the target for once an assessment has been made that treatment is required, that target of 95% is very closely met. It's 94.1%, but the 62-day target is the performance is not acceptable. And what the government is doing is focusing on improving the activities and the investment that is made in individual boards to ensure that performance can be improved. We are able to demonstrate, as the data does show, that in parts of the country the target is being met. It's been met in Lanarkshire, and the model of care in Lanarkshire of achieving both the 62-day and the 31-day target is meeting the standard. And what we are ensuring is that the learning from NHS Lanarkshire is being applied in other boards around the country to ensure that the performance is achieved. That is the approach the government is taking to ensure that the needs of patients are met and that we can move at the earliest possible opportunity to address any concerns about cancer within the population.
Russell Finlay.
I also echo the First Minister's sentiments and thank you for your service. He seems content that 1 in 14 health boards this target has been met. It's simply not good enough. The SNP government's flagship NHS recovery plan of 2021 is failing patients just as we warned that it would. Promises to reduce cancer treatment times keep being broken. Yet John Swinney will never criticise Humza Yousaf and Nicola Sturgeon's plan. At least his Public Health Minister has come clean about the price of SNP failure. Asked if lives are being lost because of late cancer diagnosis, she said, yes, they may well be. She said this in the same week that it was reported that the SNP are sitting on a £550 million underspend from last year. That's more than £500 million unspent. So will John Swinney increase cancer spending and use some of that unspent money to launch an emergency cancer fund?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, within the statistics, I think two important observations have to be made in addition to what I've already said to Mr Finlay. First of all, we are treating more patients with cancer on time within both standards compared to the same quarter 6 years ago, pre-pandemic, on both the 31-day standard and the 62-day standard. So our services are treating and interacting with more people than they were pre-COVID, which is a demonstration of the increases in capacity that we have in place. The second point to make is that in relation to the 31-day target, the median wait, that is the point at which, the midpoint in which more people are being treated, or the point at which people are being treated, is 3 days. 3 days. And last year, that point was 4 days. So we are finding improvements in the time in which treatment is being delivered. So I hope that gives Mr Finlay some confidence that the focus on improving capacity within the National Health Service to deal with cancer is at the heart of the Government's plans. Now, Mr Finlay referred to the underspend in the budget. Now, the underspend, of course, is applied to the financial provisions of this financial year. So I want to reassure members of the public that all of the underspend from the previous financial year will be able to be deployed in supporting public services, which of course assists us in supporting the budget that we have in place, which has already increased funding for cancer services in Scotland as part of the National Health Service budget, which of course is the highest budget that has ever been deployed for the National Health Service in the history of the NHS. And the Government attached the priority to this important investment in putting forward the budget that has seen a record financial settlement in place for the National Health Service.
Russell Finlay.
John Swinney seems to be patting himself on the back, which will be absolutely no consolation to all those people waiting for treatment. Because since John Swinney became First Minister, over 3,000 cancer patients are waiting longer for treatment than his government promised. Every passing day puts more lives at risk, but this government is complacent. There's no sense of urgency. The Health Secretary, who's not here today, wasn't even in Scotland to respond to these latest shocking figures. He was on a second trip to Japan, and I've no idea why he's not here today. It's absolutely ridiculous. The SNP press release said that his Japan visit was to talk up Scotland's health technology sector, and I'm all for promoting Scottish technical innovation. But this analogue SNP government can't even deliver a basic app for Scottish NHS patients. So can John Swinney tell worried cancer patients and their families how they will be helped by a Health Secretary collecting more air miles?
First Minister.
President Officer, the Health Secretary is in Japan at the Osaka Expo, which is a partnership between the Scottish Government and the United Kingdom Government, which on 3 occasions this year Scotland has an opportunity to highlight some of the strengths within the Scottish economy. One of those strengths which the Health Secretary is promoting is the life sciences sector, which is a huge asset to Scotland, and the Health Secretary is in Japan at my request, with my approval, to ensure that Scotland's life sciences sector is able to be promoted to an international audience, given the significance of the life sciences sector to our university and research community in Scotland. Now, Now, what I want to make clear to Mr Finlay is that the Government has put in place the investment provided for in the budget, which Mr Finlay didn't support, to ensure that we are able to support the delivery of healthcare services in Scotland with record funding available. We are concentrating. Mr Finlay asked me what steps could be taken to reassure patients. What I would say to patients is that the learning that has been developed in NHS Lanarkshire about improvements in the delivery of cancer services are being shared around the country. The rapid cancer diagnostic services, which are also in place in a variety of other health boards in the country, have seen significant reductions in waiting times as a consequence in different parts of the country, and all of these measures will be deployed to ensure that cancer care is delivered where people need it within our country.
Russell Finlay.
It's perhaps not surprising that Neil Gray was out of the country talking tech, because the previous SNP Health Secretary quit because of his own overseas tech difficulties. But where is Neil Gray's focus? There's a cancer care crisis, but he took taxpayer-funded limos to the pub and the football, and then he decided to go to Japan. And it says everything that John Swinney's happy to admit he sent him there. This is more than a couple of bad calls. It's a fundamental issue about his focus and professional judgment. If Neil Gray really thinks his time is better spent in Japan than in Scotland during an NHS crisis, then he shouldn't be Health Secretary. What has the Health Secretary done to give John Swinney any confidence that he can bring down cancer waiting times?
First Minister.
Mr Finlay started his questions raising very serious issues about the delivery of cancer care in Scotland, and I am determined to engage on those issues because those are issues that I recognise to be of genuine concern to members of the public. I want to assure Parliament that the focus of the First Minister, the Health Secretary and the Government is on improving waiting times. That's what we were elected to deliver, and that's what we are taking the steps to ensure is the case. It's why we put the investment in place which Mr Finlay didn't support. It's why we have the focused discussions with health boards about improving performance, about learning the lessons from areas of the country that are performing well so that we can improve standards in other parts of the country. This Government is absolutely focused on reducing waiting times for cancer and other conditions, and that will remain the focus of my Government.
Thank you. Question number 2, Anna Sarwar.
President Officer, can I start by joining others in thanking you for your service and wishing you all the best for whatever comes next, although I fully expect over the next 10 months you'll continue to hold us to proper decorum in the Parliament and tell us off from time to time in that period too. President Officer, just this week, house building at its lowest level since 2012. Sexual violence and domestic abuse rising. Delayed discharge at a record high. Almost 1 in 3 Scots forced to go private to get health care, and cancer waiting times the worst on record. Has the guy that claimed to steady the ship now become the captain of the Titanic?
First Minister.
President Officer, Mr Sarwar raises a number of important issues, and let me just go through a number of those. On housing, the Government, of course, has put in place a budget provision for this year which has seen a significant increase in housing investment, which will assist us in the affordable housing plans, building on the fact that in Scotland we've built 47% more affordable houses per head of population than in England, and 73% more than in Labour-run Wales. So that will help us. And of course, that's in a budget that Mr Sarwar never voted for. On the issues in relation to delayed discharge, 97% of patients are discharged from hospital without any delay whatsoever, and delayed discharge is falling. On recorded crime is broadly stable with where it has been. The increase of reporting of sexual crime is because more people are prepared to come forward, because this Government is prepared to pursue sexual crime and bring offenders to account. And on cancer treatment, as I've explained to Mr Finlay, the Government is focused on improving waiting times and reducing the waits that individuals have. So this Government is absolutely focused on the priorities of the people of Scotland, and that's the leadership that I deliver to ensure that's the case.
Anna Sarwar.
The fact of the matter is John Swinney and the SNP aren't working, and Scots can see that. Our NHS is fighting for survival under John Swinney, and Scots are paying the price for his incompetence. Just this week we heard the case of Gerard McBride, who has waited 76 weeks for hip and knee surgery despite crippling osteoarthritis. We heard from Alison, a mum, who told the BBC that she had to pay £4,500 for private cataract surgery. She said, and I quote, "I would have gone blind before the NHS would have seen me." And we heard from Elizabeth, who had to spend £18,000 of her own savings for a hip operation due to long waits on the NHS. This is the price Scots are paying for SNP failure. And the situation is so bad that Dr Ian Kennedy of the BMA has said that the NHS is dying before our eyes. Isn't this a damning indictment of John Swinney and the SNP, who are destroying our NHS?
First Minister.
President Officer, the Government is taking the steps to make sure that the NHS is able to have the capacity and the resources to deliver on people's expectations and their needs. So, to give two examples of that, the first is that we've put in place a record financial settlement for the National Health Service, which the Labour Party could not bring itself to vote for in the recent budget. And secondly, in April 2024, we promised to put in place an additional 64,000 appointments and procedures by the end of March 2025, and we exceeded that target, delivering 105,500 additional procedures in the first year of my term in office as First Minister. So what this Government will do is that we will focus on meeting the needs of the people of Scotland, put the money in place to do so, not duck the responsibilities as Mr Sarwar has done, and make sure people get the treatment that they require.
Anna Sarwar.
This is a failing First Minister in a failing SNP government. John Swinney took personal responsibility for tackling the crisis in Scotland's NHS, and now things are getting worse. Waiting lists up, thousands more Scots forced to go private, and cancer waiting times the worst they have ever been. And as the crisis in our NHS deepens, where was the Health Secretary this week? In Japan, lecturing on digital healthcare while he can't even sort an NHS app at home. And while he was away, we did get a rare moment of candour from Public Health Minister Jenny Minto. When asked about the worst cancer waiting times on record, she said to STV, "Are people losing their lives due to later diagnosis? Yes, they may well be." An SNP minister admitting that SNP failure is costing lives. So what does John Swinney say to the families left picking up the pieces of losing a loved one too soon?
First Minister.
What I would say to families is that the Government is doing all that it possibly can do to make sure that we have in place services that meet the needs of individuals. And the reassurance I would give them is this. When individuals are identified as requiring treatment, the median waiting time for people getting that treatment is 3 days. That means that the majority of patients are getting the urgent intervention within a matter of 3 days after their assessment. That is what the Scottish Government is doing. Now, I accept that on the 62-day target, we have not got the performance around the country that we require to have. But we know from individual parts of the country that those services can be delivered. And what the Health Secretary and I are focused on doing is making sure that in every single part of the country, people can rely on the National Health Service being there when they require it. That's the commitment I give to Parliament, and that's what we're focused on delivering.
Question number 3, Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And Presiding Officer, on behalf of the Scottish Liberal Democrats, can I thank you for your service to this Parliament as an MSP and as Presiding Officer, and particularly your commitment to the integrity and values of this Chamber. We wish you well. Presiding Officer, I've listened to what the First Minister's had to say about cancer, digging into the statistics of one health board, but when it comes down to this, when cancer is coming for you, you deserve to know that you have the best possible chance at survival. But under this SNP government, that just isn't happening. Even if you haven't had cancer, you will know somebody who has. But now, patients referred with an urgent suspicion of cancer, treatment times for them are worse than at any point on record. When this potentially lethal disease turns your world upside down, the last thing you need is a long wait for life-saving care. So can I ask the First Minister, don't these people deserve better?
First Minister.
As I hope I've demonstrated in my handling of the questions today, I take this issue and the delivery of cancer care incredibly seriously. So I don't in any way dispute the points that Mr Cole-Hamilton puts to me. But what I do want to provide is, and Mr Cole-Hamilton posed his question to me in a particular way about when people have a cancer diagnosis, they need to know they will get the urgent intervention. And the reassurance that I will give Mr Cole-Hamilton, and I know it's statistics, but it matters, is that the median wait, if once a diagnosis is given, is 3 days. So the intervention could hardly be any more immediate than the 3-day intervention for the majority of patients. So what the government will do, I accept that the 62-day target is not being met sufficiently well around the country, and we are focused on strengthening capacity to make sure that is the case. But we are treating more patients with cancer on time and within both standards compared to the same quarter prior to the pandemic. And the pandemic has disrupted healthcare, but we are on cancer care treating more patients with cancer on time within both standards. And I hope that gives some reassurance to Mr Cole-Hamilton about the steps the government is taking.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Presiding Officer, it is the delay in diagnosis that we're talking about here, and his reassurance will come as cold comfort to everyone waiting for the post this morning in want of an appointment for diagnosis. His regret won't save lives. In Scotland, more people die of lung cancer than any other form of the disease. It kills 4,000 Scots every year. If you come from a poorer background, your chances are far worse. 3 years ago, the UK National Screening Committee recommended the whole of the United Kingdom introduce lung cancer screening to help prevent it or to catch it early. It would be targeted at those who are at the highest risk, people aged between 55 and 74 who smoke or who used to smoke. And experts have called it a game changer. Presiding Officer, survival rates for lung cancer in Scotland aren't much better than they were in the 1970s. This intervention could save hundreds of lives every year. This cancer screening programme is being rolled out across the whole of England, but not here. Why not? Why are we years behind? Why are we so slow? Why are Scots missing out on this life-saving detection service?
First Minister.
President Officer, I will look with care at the points that Mr Cole-Hamilton has put to me. But of course, we have a track record in Scotland of screening programmes that are formidable and significant in the effect that they have. Particularly the Bell's screening programme is one example of those provisions that we have in place. The Government, as I set out in my speech on health service issues in January, and again in my speech on public service reform just last week, the Government is shifting the focus ever more to early intervention and prevention to ensure that we identify conditions that can deliver better outcomes if identified at an earlier stage, and that will be the focus of the Government's policy approach on this question.
Question number 4, Joe Fitzpatrick.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to the Sarcoma UK report, unique amongst cancers.
First Minister.
President, as I've already recognised, I fully recognise the challenges we continue to face in cancer care. However, this report highlights that specialist cancer care in Scotland is of a high standard. I am committed to ensuring that everyone affected by cancer, including those with rarer forms like sarcoma, receive timely, equitable and compassionate care. We will publish our refreshed Scottish referral guidelines for suspected cancer, including for sarcoma and bone cancer this summer, to ensure that patients are on the right pathways at the right time. The Scottish Government will continue to work to identify where improvements can and must be made.
Joe Fitzpatrick.
Minister for his answer, and I'm sure that he agrees that while sarcoma is a rare form of cancer, every person affected deserves timely diagnosis, access to specialist care and the best possible treatment of support. Can the First Minister provide an update on the work the Scottish Government is undertaking already to ensure that this can happen, and will he ensure his Government engages with Sarcoma UK on the 16 recommendations in their report?
Minister.
I certainly give that commitment for engagement in relation to the recommendations in the report. As I've indicated in my answer to Mr Cole-Hamilton, early diagnosis is a critical factor on this issue, and the Detect Cancer Earlier programme has led to the delivery of rapid cancer diagnostic services, which are a key tool in taking forward this work. Our 6th diagnostic service opened in NHS Forth Valley in May of this year, and we've invested over £40 million over the past 5 years to support cancer services and improve waiting times, and the budget that Mr Fitzpatrick supported earlier this year will assist us in that endeavour.
Brief supplementary, Jackie Bailey.
Cancer is Scotland's biggest killer, whether it is a rare sarcoma or a more common cancer. Yet waiting times for cancer treatment in the first quarter of this year were the worst on record. And quoting median waits, First Minister, is no comfort for those waiting longer. This is a matter of life or death, and your own Minister accepted that people were dying as a result of these delays. In the very week that the Chair of the BMA said that the NHS was dying before his eyes, how much longer do we need to tolerate this SNP government, who are not delivering improvements and continue to let down staff and patients with devastating results?
First Minister.
I want to reassure members of the public that this issue has the focus and the attention of the Government, the First Minister and the Health Secretary. I've set out already, and I'll repeat, forgive me.
Let's hear one another.
Forgive me, Presiding Officer, I'll repeat some of what I've said already. We are treating more patients with cancer on time within both standards compared to the same quarter 6 years ago. So we have expanded capacity. We recognise there are challenges in waiting times, but the Government has put the investment in place to enable that to be the case. We can see where the best practice operates within the country, and the Health Secretary and I are working to ensure that that is deployed in all parts of the country.
Thank you. We have extremely high interesting questions today, so if we can be concise, that will enable more members an opportunity. I call Tim Eagle at question number 5.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to reports that several local authorities are delaying the introduction of the visitor levy.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the Visitor Levy Scotland Act 2024 gives councils the discretionary power to apply a local visitor levy if they think it is right for their area. If, after they have consulted local businesses, communities and tourism organisations, a local authority does not consider that timing or circumstances are right to introduce a levy, then it is entirely appropriate for them to make that decision. That is what the Highlands and Western Isles councils have done. They have assessed the appropriateness of introducing such a measure and decided not to proceed currently, while the City of Edinburgh and the City of Glasgow councils are proceeding with their proposals. That is local democracy in action.
Tim Eagle.
Presiding Officer, there is no political disaster like an SNP disaster. Not content with an Island Act that doesn't work, ferries that can barely get out the docks, the visitor levy is causing a crisis amongst already vulnerable rural businesses. You can mutter away, but it's true. Orkney, Shetland and Western Isles Council have all delayed the introduction of a visitor levy, with the latter saying...
Let's hear one another.
They don't want to hear it. With the latter saying it could risk its visitor economy, destroying tourism in Scotland. Meanwhile, South Ayrshire Council has abandoned its plans altogether. Over 750 small businesses in my region signed an open letter to the Deputy First Minister calling for changes to make the levy fairer. Has the First Minister reflected on the concerns from businesses, and will he at least agree today to the industry ask to move to a flat rate charge?
First Minister.
President Officer, I've heard from the Conservative Party over many years the need to ensure that there is local decision-making capability in different parts of the country. And that's exactly what the Government and what Parliament has legislated for. We have legislated to enable local authorities to take a decision after consultation if they judge that to be right. Now, the Conservatives have got to decide what they believe in. Do they believe in local democracy or not? Every time they spend most of their time accusing us of centralisation. When we give local authorities the decision-making power, they complain about that as well. The Conservatives haven't got a clue what they're arguing for in this Parliament.
Brief supplementary, Alistair Allen.
The inclusion in the Government's recent consultation on a cruise ship levy included the option of a port of entry model, which has been welcomed by the tourist sector in the islands. So can the First Minister confirm that the Government will give consideration to the views that they expressed about this as a potential model for island areas?
First Minister.
So we've consulted widely on a proposed cruise ship levy, as we promised that we would do. The responses are currently being analysed, and all views will be considered as we make decisions on next steps in relation to this area of policy.
Question number 6, Marie McNair.
To ask the First Minister what assessment the Scottish Government has made of the latest Office of National Statistics inflation statistics and any implications for its work to support low-income households.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the latest official inflation figures show annual CPI inflation was 3.4% in May. This is above the Bank of England's 2% target, but official forecasters expect inflation to fall later this year and return close to target in 2026. We are acutely aware of pressure on household budgets across Scotland, which is why in 25-26 we continue to allocate over £3 billion a year to policies that tackle poverty and the cost of living, including mitigating the impact of the harshest Westminster policies like the bedroom tax and the benefit cap.
Marie McNair.
The First Minister for that answer. With the main rate of inflation at the highest rate for more than a year, food prices growing for a third month, increased national insurance contributions and planned welfare cuts, the cost of living crisis fuelled by Labour's obsession with austerity is unfortunately still hurting families. And does the First Minister agree with me that, given the current Labour fiasco on welfare policy, it is increasingly clear that only the SNP Scottish Government are serious about tackling poverty and giving vital and compassionate support to families with children and disabled people in Scotland?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government has taken a number of measures to address the cost of living challenges that members of the public face, whether that's about ensuring that we have the investment, for example, in early learning and childcare, which saves families thousands of pounds in childcare costs, or whether that's the investment in the Scottish Child Payment, which boosts household income for those in poverty, or the steps that we in the Scottish Government are taking to lift the two-child limit, a cap that should have been lifted as one of the first acts of the United Kingdom Labour Government. So we will always take actions to support families who are facing financial hardship and difficulty. But of course we face a new threat, which is the benefit cuts agenda of the United Kingdom Labour Government. And at a time when many Labour MPs are now saying that these cuts are unacceptable, isn't it just telling that Anas Sarwar is supporting the Prime Minister in implementing the benefit cuts? It demonstrates that Anas Sarwar won't be standing up for Scotland anytime soon.
Thank you. We move to constituency and general supplementaries, and I call Edward Mountain.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Highlanders have now lost yet another medical speciality from our area. Our last vascular surgeon has been forced to leave as the service has been so downgraded it's no longer functional or safe. His loss can be added to the loss of our only interventional radiologist in the region, as well as maternity services in Caithness. First Minister, these are critical losses, more critical to the Highlands than the inevitable loss to the SNP of the Inverness and Nairn seat in 2026. First Minister, your government is condoning and forcing Highlanders to get into cars and travel hundreds of miles when seriously ill for treatment. When, First Minister, will you put a stop to the destruction of our local health care in the Highlands, as it appears your Cabinet Secretary for Health is incapable of doing so?
First Minister.
There's a number of issues in Mr Mountain's question that I need to address, because there are a number of different factors at play. First of all, the issues in relation to maternity services in Caithness have been addressed because of clinical assessments about the most appropriate way in which services should be delivered. And I think Parliament would take a dim view of ministers that ignored clinical assessments of the safety and the efficacy of maternity services, and we would not be doing anyone a service if we ignored that clinical opinion. Now, on other questions, such as the point on vascular surgery, we will face challenges in different parts of the country. Indeed, that lies at the heart of some of the issues around about cancer care that I have addressed already, of our ability to recruit clinical leadership to deliver these services. I have absolutely no desire for us not to be able to provide services of the type that Mr Mountain has raised. But if we struggle to recruit individuals to deliver those services, those are practical realities that the government has to address. And lastly, let me say this to Mr Mountain. The government has invested in establishing a national treatment centre in Inverness, which is delivering thousands of procedures on behalf of Highlanders and people from other parts of the country because of the focus on delivering high-quality healthcare in that environment. That's an indication of the Scottish Government's commitment to the Highlands, one of many other commitments that this Government will continue to deliver.
Stuart McMillan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister will be aware of the recent announcement that the RTS turn-off is to be phased out. That has been delayed. Now, this is welcome, as the experience of many of my constituents has been far from positive, with some making appointments only to have engineers not turn up or actually have them cancelled at short notice. So would the First Minister join me in calling on anyone who has an RTS meter to contact their energy supplier as soon as possible, and if they have any issues, to contact their MSP or advice services like Advice Direct Scotland and Age Scotland for support?
First Minister.
Well, I agree with Mr McMillan. This has taken far too long to be resolved, and I would echo his calls for individuals who are affected to make the appropriate contact with their supplier urgently, and if issues remain, to alert Advice Services and Ofgem if they have any issues to address. But I'm glad that we have some respite, but it's taken far too long to get there.
Claire Baker.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. The rise in recorded rape and attempted rape of 15% in the past year is highly alarming. This coalesces with the increasing normalisation of violence and sexual activity, where non-fatal strangulation has become more prevalent and mainstream. I have been calling for government action to challenge this culture, to be clear on the health and criminal consequences, and invest much more heavily in prevention work with young people. Will the First Minister commit to taking this action forward?
First Minister.
I am very happy to associate myself with the comments of Claire Baker. In relation to recorded crime, total recorded crime shows very little change. It's down less than 1% compared to the previous year. And of course, the level of recorded crime in Scotland is now down 40% since 2006-07. But within those figures, there is a significant rise in the reporting of sexual offences. I think what this is indicative of is a greater willingness of victims to come forward, and I welcome that and I encourage that. There is more historical reporting of individual cases, and I welcome that as well, so that these issues can be pursued. But there is also, as Claire Baker rightly points out, a culture that is more prevalent, which normalises sexual violence against women. And I deprecate that, I condemn it, and I commit the government and commit my leadership to ensuring that the behaviour of men is properly and fully confronted to address the legitimate concerns that Claire Baker puts to Parliament today.
David Torrance.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Given the rising cost of living, free school meals have an important role to play in reducing pressures on families, whilst improving the lives of young people across Scotland. And that's more important than ever in the face of a continued austerity from Westminster. Can the First Minister advise how the Scottish Government's recent work in expanding free school meals to pupils in S1 to S3 in 8 council areas, including in my constituency of Kirkcaldy, will support this work to ensure that every child has the best start in life, regardless of their background?
First Minister.
Sir, I very much associate myself with the comments of Mr Torrance in relation to the challenges around the cost of living. On Monday, I set out the approach the Government's taking to the delivery of a pilot exercise in 8 local authority areas. I visited Springburn Academy in the city of Glasgow on Monday. and saw first-hand the benefits of the offer of a healthy, nutritious free school meal to young people in S1 to S3. Those young people are in receipt, or their families are in receipt of the Scottish Child Payment, and the Government will take forward this proposal, and it will be rolled out in about 60 schools across 8 local authority areas in the course of the next school year, and that could benefit over 6,000 young people and contribute to tackling the cost of living issue, and also give young people a healthy and nutritious school meal as part of their day.
Jackson Carlo.
So it's almost a year to the day that we learned of the untimely loss to cancer of Professor Alison Britton, an outstanding public servant whose timing of whose death meant that her contribution to public life here in Scotland I don't think was properly recognised by this Parliament, not least the 2 groundbreaking landmark reports commissioned by the Scottish Government that she produced into transvaginal mesh. Her loss is keenly felt by me, all her colleagues, those who work for her, but in particular by the thousands of women who suffered the injustice of mesh and who saw in her championship leadership. Will the First Minister undertake to revisit the 2 reports and the many recommendations which the Government accepted in full, which I don't believe yet have been fully implemented, update Parliament on the progress in regard to that? And will he also ask the Health Secretary to work with the Labour Government at Westminster to revisit the recommendations of the Hughes report into compensation for the women who suffered the mesh injustice and who have waited far too long?
First Minister.
I'm very happy to take forward those points, and I take this opportunity to express my appreciation for the distinguished public service and the distinguished clinical leadership of Professor Alison Britton. I think what is perhaps the best way to take this forward is if I meet with Mr Carlo to discuss these issues over the course of the summer, so that I can properly and fully take stock of the progress that has been made and what requires to be undertaken, and then we can report to Parliament at the start of the parliamentary session in September. And I will ask the Health Secretary to engage with the United Kingdom Government on the Hughes report, but I will make arrangements to see Mr Carlo to discuss those issues.
Carol Mockin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister may be aware that Amy planned to make up to 100 road maintenance workers in Ayrshire and Dumfries and Galloway redundant. These workers are funded by a Scottish Government contract. The A77 is one of the most dangerous roads in Scotland, with constant disruption to the economy of the South West due to its poor state of repair. My constituents have frequent lengthy waits at roadworks and often miles of diversions. Will the First Minister travel this road with me and explain to my constituents why 100 workers who should be helping to maintain this important road are losing their jobs?
First Minister.
I understand these issues are the subject of consultation between Amy and the relevant trade unions, and I would obviously want to make sure that that is all done properly in accordance with the fair work principles of the Government. So I understand the importance of the point that Carol Mockin is raising in Parliament today, but there will be a process that has to be gone through about those issues, and it may not be the outcome that is achieved is the one that Carol Mockin fears. So I will ask the Transport Secretary to consider the issues that have been raised and to reply to Carol Mockin about how these points can be properly and fully addressed.
Christine Graham.
Well, thank you very much, Presiding Officer. First Minister, on 24th April, asked First Minister's questions. I asked about the guidance on mothballing rural nurseries, and I was told then that the guidance was already under review. Now, we're at the end of the school and nursery year, so can I ask, is the review concluded, and if so, when will it be published?
First Minister.
President, I understand that there's to be dialogue with stakeholders over the summer in relation to the guidance, which is, of course, part of the necessary process of dialogue the Government has to go through when it's reviewing such material. The local authorities preparing for the new academic year should follow the existing guidance when considering these questions, and the guidance is clear on the need for local decisions to be based upon effective engagement with the community, reflecting the needs of local families. And I know that issue will matter significantly to Christine Graham, given her local engagement on all of these issues, which she's raised with me previously. and which I know are at the heart of her concerns.
Craig Hoy.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. On Monday, for the third time in as many months, I visited the usual place in Dumfries. As the First Minister knows from his own recent visit, Craig McEwen and his team operate a life-changing hospitality-based project which equips young people with disabilities and ASN needs with the experience, confidence and skills to enter the workplace. But last weekend it was confirmed that the usual place has been unsuccessful in its application to the Scottish Government's Learning Disability Support Fund. If no further Scottish Government funding is confirmed soon, Craig McEwen fears that the usual place could have to shut its doors for good in December. First Minister, we cannot let this happen. So will Mr Swinney engage with his officials and Inspiring Scotland to turn the warm words that he spoke during his recent visit into urgently needed financial support?
First Minister.
I value enormously the usual place. It's a venue that I know well and I've engaged with on a number of occasions over my ministerial life, and I visited the usual place just a few weeks ago to see the good work that's in place. The funding round that Mr Hoy has referred to is a competitive funding round, and the decisions that were made there are taken at arm's length from governments. It's an assessment of individual applications. And he is correct, the usual place were unsuccessful. However, there is interim funding in place through other government channels of funding which have been put in place both from South of Scotland Enterprise and also from one of if my memory serves me right, one of the health-based funds which are supporting the work of the usual place, and I'm committed to trying to find a solution in that respect. So I don't really think it is fair for Mr Hoy to say there hasn't been government funding put into or effort put in to try to find funding, because what I've just put on the record refutes what Mr Hoy is saying. So I'm completely committed to doing all that we can to support the usual place, which does outstanding work in transforming the lives of young people in our country.
Briefest supplementary, Ross Greer.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This morning, Oxfam published a report showing a huge increase in private jet travel in and out of Scotland. Private jets are a disaster for the climate. They're 20 to 30 times more polluting than regular commercial air travel. 2 of the 3 airports that have seen the significant increase are owned by the Scottish Government. Air departure tax has not been devolved, but could the First Minister commit to introducing a charge at Scottish Government-owned airports to ensure that these super-rich elites pay for the amount of pollution they're throwing into our atmosphere?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I've already stated that I'm interested in the suggestion of higher tax rates on private jet flights. We continue to explore all options for implementing air departure tax, but this must be done in a way that protects the connectivity of the Highlands and Islands and the lifeline services these communities rely upon. So I understand and I sympathise with the points that Mr Greer is raising today, and we will consider that as part of the steps on air departure tax. But as I think Mr Greer will know, there is an incredible amount of complexity in these issues, and we have to make sure we've got a sustainable way that doesn't in any way undermine the approach that we take in the Highlands and Islands.
Thank you. That concludes First Minister's questions. The next item of business is a member's business debate in the name of Douglas Ross, and there will now be a short suspension to allow those leaving the chamber and the gallery to do so.
Okay, if I could ask those leaving the public gallery to do so as quickly and as quietly as possible as we move on to the next item of business, which is a members' business debate on motion 17969 in the name of Douglas Ross on action to address the impact of gulls in Scotland. The debate will be concluded without any questions being put. I invite members wishing to participate to press the request to speak buttons. I ask Douglas Ross to open the debate. Around 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Those people leaving the public gallery don't know what they're missing, because I'm sure this will be an excellent debate on gulls. And I have to say 7 minutes is a tight time frame, because since this debate has been announced, I have been inundated with even further correspondence about it. And I was just thinking, following on from Stephen Kerr's heroic efforts over the last couple of days, I might look for opportunities to lodge Stage 3 amendments to certain legislation about gulls, just to allow us even greater time to discuss this. But I will base that on the Minister's remarks later on, because I hope we will make some progress. And some people do smirk when you say you're going to be debating in Parliament about the issue of gulls. But this is an extremely serious issue, which is why I was actually surprised this is only the second member's business on the issue of the menace of gulls in the Scottish Parliament since it was re-established in 1999, and the last one was held in 2002, and it was also led by a Conservative, my colleague and friend David Mundell. So there was clearly an issue back then, because the title was Gulls were causing an increasing nuisance. That was in 2002, 23 years on. Here we are still discussing this. Could I also pay particular thanks to Fergus Ewing for the work we have done together on this in recent months. When I was told I had the opportunity for today's slot to debate gulls, I checked with Fergus first that he would be here and able to contribute, because he has put in a significant amount of effort in his own constituency and has worked very well cross-party to deliver for his constituents. Now, I want to raise some of the cases that have been highlighted with me. And on Murrayforth Radio MFR this morning, there was a case of a couple, a retired couple in Hopeman. The husband and wife are now worried about going down Forsyth Street in Hopeman, because they are continually dive-bombed every time they go there. They are worried about going out of their own home. I had a case last year. A constituent came to my surgery in Milton Duff, who explained she couldn't leave her house. She's got a small dog. Every time they left, they were attacked by gulls that were nesting on her property. She put in for licences, and she was actually given permission, such was the severe problems, to have up to 10 licences to remove nests every year. But the cost of getting someone in to remove those nests was £200 a time. So this retired lady, who's now 73, has to spend £2,000 of her own money to remove these nests every year. And that's why this is an issue, and it is a growing issue. I've spoken to a number of my Scottish Conservative council colleagues over the last couple of weeks about this. Councillor Isabel Mackenzie has spoken about the issue in the Crown area, where she lives and represents. It is a growing issue. She spoke about how stonemasons are reporting problems just being able to go about and do their work. Councillor Babs Jarvie in Nairn spoke about the huge issues that it has for local people there, but also tourists coming to Nairn. And if anyone looks at the BBC today, there is a story about the impact and the growing problem that is increasing in recent years about the impact of gulls in Nairn. In my own area of Murray, Councillor Pete Bloomfield and Elaine Kirby have raised issues in their own council ward in Elgin. Pete Bloomfield told me about a terrible story that I've recited to the Minister before, about a lady who fell outside her house as a result of a gull attack, broke her leg, went to hospital, came back out of hospital and was attacked again. And Councillor Amber Dunbar was telling me, while she didn't have any specific cases about injuries to people, she highlighted a very good point, that it's sometimes not just physical injuries, there is a mental health impact. These gulls are so noisy, particularly early in the morning and throughout the day, that people end up having some mental health issues because they cannot get to sleep at night. They're woken up early in the morning, and particularly shift workers can't get to sleep at all during the day. And she also made the point about how Nature Scot are there to protect and conserve bird numbers, but actually gulls dominating areas is seeing a reduction in the number of garden birds that people are seeing. I'm grateful to everyone who provided briefings for this debate. However, I do have to highlight the briefing that came from the charity One Kind, because they say in their briefing that we should avoid value-laden language. They say referring to gulls as a menace or nuisance and their behaviour as mugging or dive-bombing creates and reinforces a perception that gulls are acting maliciously and that their presence is a problem. Well, I will say these gulls are a menace, they are dive bombing, and they are a problem. I will give way, if I have time, Presiding Officer, to Christine Graham.
Christine Graham. Be tackling the language that is used of gulls.
Douglas Ross.
I didn't hear that properly, so I'll give way again quickly.
Christine Graham.
I do not agree with these terms, and I will be addressing these in a short defence, if I may, a cautious defence of the common gull.
As Christine Graham is perfectly able and willing to do, I disagree with that strongly. They are a menace. And this constituent in Hopeman, who's on the radio today, they use the word dive bombing because they are being dive bombed by these birds. I want to also highlight the work done by business improvement districts, and particularly the work Fergus Ewing and I have done together has been so ably aided by the bids in Nairn and Inverness. They are going above and beyond for their members to get schemes in place, but it is costing a fortune. So the other thing that's mentioned in the motion is just how much money is being spent trying to get licences, trying to control these birds. It is tens of thousands of pounds, either through business improvement districts or through common good funds or through community councils. It is a huge amount of money that could be better spent on other local projects or improving the environment for local businesses, but it has to go on to these issues. And I will say, because I'm sure the Minister will mention it, I would encourage, I would make, in the strongest possible terms, the case for people to stop feeding these birds, to stop leaving rubbish out, because that does cause part of the problem. And I am not ignoring that, I am reinforcing that. But there is also an issue with the licensing scheme where it is proving far too complex, far too difficult and far too expensive to get these licences. So my debate today, Presiding Officer, is not just coming with complaints, but also coming with solutions. That's why I think we do need to see a record taken of the number of attacks on people by gulls. Now, I put this to the Minister last week at Rural Affairs Questions, and I was encouraged by his response. But how on earth can Nature Scot refuse applications saying that the gulls in a particular area are not a health and safety risk when they are not even recording how many people are injured in attacks by gulls? And conversely, Nature Scot do record injuries and deaths, not of people, but of birds. So if birds go into wind turbines, they keep a record of that, but they don't take any record of people being injured, and I think they have to look at that. And finally, Presiding Officer, I want to see a very separate role for Nature Scot. Currently, they are clearly conflicted between conserving and preserving bird numbers and also being the agency that looks at and deliberates on applications to control birds and rejects or approves these applications. It is not possible anymore for Nature Scot to do that dual role, so I hope the Minister will consider separating those roles. And finally, we get action from this government, because 23 years on from the last members' debate, gulls are still an increasing problem in our communities. They are causing a nuisance and people want action. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Ross. It is likely, given the interest in this subject, that we will need to extend the time, but I'm conscious that afternoon business starts at 2 o'clock, so I'd be grateful if members would stick to their 4 minutes or even less. We move to the open debate. I call first Emma Roddick, to be followed by Finlay Carson. Up to 4 minutes. Ms Roddick.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I thank Douglas Ross for bringing this debate to the Chamber. It is good to get the opportunity to really explore what more can be done to deal with local seagull issues, many of which have been reported to myself as well. I live next to an industrial estate in Inverness, so I absolutely understand the issues that seagulls can cause in residential areas in particular. My mother always used a different name for them that many Highlanders will recognise, but that I won't repeat in the Chamber. I do receive a disproportionate number of complaints about these birds in certain communities. And it's not just the noise, the mess or a nuisance. I am aware that people have been injured and their property has been damaged. And some of the incidents that Douglas Ross mentioned are very extreme and clearly having a massive impact on people's lives. So it's important that councils and their partners are able to react more quickly when issues are emerging. By the time that an issue is noticed and then reported and then responded to, it's often past the point that things like targeting eggs can be considered and be effective. And from then on, it is hard to roll back on the disruption rather than just limit how much worse it gets year on year. Nature Scot, of course, issues licences as a last resort where there are issues of public safety. But in between there being no issue and there needing to be a last resort taken, there are opportunities for us to prevent the problem from becoming dire. When I look out my kitchen window, I can see seagulls nesting on the spikes that are there to drive them away. So maybe we do need to reconsider what measures are actually effective and that should be allowed for local councils and partners to take. I do know that Inverness and Nairn bids often manage to successfully target seagull issues, and I thank them for that. It's not very often as an MSP that people reach out to me to share good news or positive feedback, but I have heard repeatedly that the partnership working there with tenants associations, with businesses, with building owners has often meant that good progress is made and their contributions are listened to. However, as somebody who served as a councillor 6 years ago, and at that time was part of the decisions mentioned in Douglas Ross's motion to keep on awarding funding to tackle the problem from the Inverness Common Good Fund, it does feel like very slow progress. I have had constituents write in with concern too about the approaches that are taken in destroying eggs, feeling that it's not always a last resort, but sometimes the only option available. In Nairn, one person raised with me that it is usually human behaviour that she witnesses that encourages these birds. So whether it's locals or tourists, you will often find people littering or intentionally feeding the seagulls. We cannot blame those birds for moving in where they get an easy meal, but we can do more to discourage that behaviour from other humans. Nature Scott does have a duty to protect the species, and I do have to say that it is rare, not unheard of, but rare, that a constituent wants to indiscriminately kill the birds with no regard to the species being able to survive. People don't want the extreme and dangerous behaviour that we see when the situation is allowed to get out of control. So I agree with colleagues that we need to give local communities full options to deal with the gulls and stop situations from becoming out of control where the birds have started to pose a risk and that concern has been raised. So I look forward to hearing the Minister's response to the suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call Finlay Carston to be followed by Rhoda Grant. Up to 4 minutes. Mr Carston.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. The relentless, noisy squawking and aggressive behaviour have made them a nuisance across Scotland. No, I'm not referring to the Nationalists, though on this final sitting day before summer recess, I hope we can part on the best of terms for once. But I'm talking about the growing scourge of gulls, particularly in my constituency of Galloway and West Dumfries, where these wild flappers seem to rule the roost and, frankly, appear to revel in the misery they cause in communities like Kirkcudbright, Stranraer, Dumfries and beyond. And I want to thank my Conservative colleague Douglas Ross for securing this debate. It's an issue that is long overdue serious attention. We've heard the stories: elderly residents attacked outside their homes, children left bloodied by swooping gulls. This is no longer just about a sensational headline. It's about a growing public safety risk that is spreading far beyond our coastal towns and into urban centres across Scotland. These birds are no longer confined to our beaches. They're now snatching fish and chips, hamburgers and even crisps from outside shop fronts, and they've adapted to urban life and are thriving on it. As researchers like Helen Wilson at Durham University have pointed out, this isn't necessarily about rising gull numbers, it's about shifting behaviour. Urban environments now offer more reliable food sources and fewer natural predators. And with changes in fishing practices, more violent winter storms and warming seas, gulls are abandoning their traditional coastal habitats and heading inland. But while gulls may be adapting, our system for managing them is not. Nature Scott's current approach to licensing is simply not fit for purpose. And I say that not just as a constituent MSP, but also echoing the serious concerns raised by Scottish Land and Estate in the recent briefing. SLE members, who are among the primary applicants for species control licence, have reported a litany of issues with Nature Scott's licensing regime, including unrealistic demands for evidence of species impact, excessive delays in processing applications, a narrow and insufficient list of species eligible for control, licensing officers making decisions beyond their remit, and a lack of understanding of practicalities of wildlife management. So let me give you one example. In the south of Scotland, an estate was told it couldn't control ravens near a special site of scientific interest due to potential disturbance to breeding waders. Instead, they were advised to use gas guns and bangers. That method would have caused far more disruption than a single moderated shot. It's just not logical and it's counterproductive. In another case, Nature Scott unlawfully advised an increase in raven control under a livestock protection licence, when the actual concern was the protection of ground nesting birds. And in implementing the new grouse shooting licensing scheme, they misinterpreted the Wildlife Management and Urban Act, unlawfully requesting estate boundary licences. Later, they were forced to backtrack. This is not a one-off. It's a pattern of poor decision-making that is actively undermining the ability of land managers to protect people, livestock and biodiversity. In my own constituency, councillors are spending upwards of £85,000 a year trying to manage gulls, money that could be far better spent if the licensing system actually worked. Nature Scotland insists that lethal control should be a last resort, but when non-lethal methods fail, as they often do, communities are left without any viable options, and the result is growing frustration, rising costs and a real risk to public safety. In Dumfries, residents have even raised a petition demanding action. Businesses are being targeted, people are being harassed, and yet the licensing process remains slow, opaque and overly restrictive. We need a system that works, one that is easy to access, proportionate and risk-based, grounded in practical understanding and, above all, responsive to the needs of each and every community. Licences should be easy to obtain where there is clear evidence of harm. They should be difficult to lose unless misused. And they should be rationally connected to a licensable purpose, not bogged down in bureaucratic overreach. Deputy Presiding Officer, this is not about demonising wildlife or gulls, it's about restoring balance. It's about protecting people, property and public health, and it's about ensuring that our licensing bodies are equipped and willing to act in the public safety. The status quo is not working. If we don't act now, the consequences could be far more serious than a stolen sandwich.
Thank you. I now call Rhoda Grant to be followed by Mark Ruskell. Up to 4 minutes, Ms Grant.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I also want to thank Douglas Ross for securing this debate and also to pay tribute to the work of Councillors Sandy Keith and John Divers in Murray, who have been wrestling with this issue in Elgin for many years. And I think we need to be clear, the birds are not acting maliciously, but they're looking for food and they're trying to protect their young. And urban seagulls have been causing a problem and very often are a danger to the public. And we've all witnessed seagulls snatching food out of unsuspecting people's hands. And that can be dangerous. As they swoop and snatch, they can hurt people, and it's a greater issue for old people and young people. The more vulnerable can be knocked down and be seriously injured, and we've seen people injured and bleeding from having been swooped on by seagulls. And I also remember hearing of one very kind food outlet offering to replace the food of school children who'd had their lunch snatched from their hands by seagulls. And the problem, we all know, gets worse when they have chicks, because seagulls are good parents. And as their young begin to fledge, they become even more protective. Anyone inadvertently getting close to a fledgling chick is likely to be attacked, and that can cause injury and fear for those who are attacked. One of my constituents contacted Nature Scot about this, and they replied saying that they would not grant a licence for nest and egg removal if gulls were simply creating a nuisance. They would only grant a licence if there was a public health and safety issue, and even then nest and egg removal is only used as a last resort. And they said that gull numbers were in decline, and this may be the case, and this may be the case in their normal habitat, but it doesn't feel like it's the case in urban areas where the danger they cause to the public is increasing. And Nature's very quickly.
Douglas Ross.
I'm grateful to Rhoda Grant for giving way, because the issue of licences being approved is a crucial point that we need to hear more from the Government on. Does she agree that while rejecting many of these applications, Nature Scot are offering alternatives that are simply unworkable? For example, telling people to use an umbrella to get into a store in Inverness that was suffering from this. They are not looking at reasonable alternatives.
Rhoda Grant, I can give you the time back.
Yes, I absolutely agree, because the same constituent who wrote to them was being told to go to local government because it was a local government issue, because they needed to stop people dropping food in the street, they needed to stop littering, and they needed to put better bins that seagulls couldn't get into in place, rather than removing eggs and nests. And it seems to me that they're saying, on one hand, they're not going to do anything because seagull numbers are falling. But if they were concerned about the falling seagull numbers, the rationale of their response would not be removing food sources as well. So it seems to me that what they're really trying to do is make sure that somebody else takes action rather than themselves and passing the buck. And we can't continue in this way, because we have to make sure that things change, because this is a danger to the public. Almost 20 years ago in Inverness, there was a sharp increase in gulls coming into the city, and Emma Roddick spoke about that, and following the closure of a landfill site nearby. And the council did take measures. They were removing nests under licence, but they were looking at other deterrents that were not deadly to birds, and that all helped. So putting together all the available tools and approaches works, and that includes using things like sonar, lasers, as well as using birds of prey alongside the licensed removal of nests. But all these strategies have to be considered to get timely intervention for towns like Elgin and Inverness, and indeed many others. The more this debate has been coming, the more we've heard. There is a role for the SNP government to better facilitate the effective relationship whereby Nature Scot and local authorities can work together, utilising all the tools at their disposal. And of course this needs funding, and we know local authorities have been underfunded for years, and therefore it's simply not right that Nature Scot pass on their responsibility. So I hope the Minister will talk about how the government will step in to make sure that all the organisations concerned manage the danger caused by seagulls attacking people, because it is a public health issue.
Okay, I call Mark Ruskell to be followed by Craig Hoy. Up to 4 minutes, Mr Ruskell.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I thank Douglas Ross for moving this for a debate in the Chamber? I certainly acknowledge that there are areas where we need to see more effective management, more effective consideration about how we can coexist with gull populations. But I would hope that he would acknowledge that in the 23 years since Parliament last debated this topic, that herring gull populations have collapsed in Scotland. Numbers have halved since the 1980s. There are huge pressures on our seabirds, and it's actually part of the reason why gulls are now moving more into urban areas, because the coastal environments that they would usually inhabit are under pressure and are under attack. If there's time in hand, I'll take a brief intervention from Mr.
Briefly, Fergus Ewing.
Thank you for giving way, Mr Russell. It's just been stated that the populations of I think herring gulls and urban black gulls, the two main species, have declined. Presiding Officer, there is no such evidence for that. In fact, Nature Scot now admit that there is no evidence regarding the populations of the urban-based species, and therefore this whole debate is proceeding on a false assertion.
Mark Ruskell.
Well, I would simply ask Mr Ewing to really speak to Nature Scot and speak to those who are actually monitoring our bird populations across Scotland. The fact that herring gulls are on the red list of protected species suggests that the science behind this shows that herring gull populations are collapsing. And I think, I would also point out the fact that Scotland is an internationally important location for herring gulls. We host about a quarter of the global breeding population. And these pressures from climate change, food shortages, avian flu have contributed to the worrying declines in these seabird populations. But, they continue to be under attack in local areas as well. I get people writing to me about gulls the whole time. And actually, a group of people from Burnt Island wrote to me this week, really concerned because Forth Ports have demolished a hangar at the old BIFAB site. There were young flightless herring gull chicks that were stranded on that roof, and they were just killed. The hangars were brought down, they were killed. Dozens of nesting sites were destroyed. Now, that might hearten Douglas Ross and some members of the Conservative Party, but I would say to them that is a wildlife crime. That is a wildlife crime, and it's a crime that will be investigated by the SSPCA and Police Scotland, because these birds are protected for a very good reason. Now, obviously, there are options for authorities to control gulls where they're causing a problem. And we're aware that there are three circumstances that can take place: where there's a threat to human health and safety, where other non-lethal measures have been ineffective and where it's not harmful to the conservation of the overall population. That is the basis of the current licensing regime. But we do have to consider what happens in our towns around waste management. I would point to the situation in Stirling at the moment, where on a Tuesday morning in the centre of town, it's bin collection day. We have bagged bin collections. And of course, the gulls are flooding in to Stirling on a Tuesday morning because they know that they can get an easy meal by opening up the bags. They're smart, they're intelligent creatures. And I've also seen, local residents putting out bread for the gulls in between the times that they're being, that the waste collection is taking place. And this just exacerbates the problem. So we do need to have an approach which is led by councils, which involves Nature Scott, which involves the business community as well, and actually educates local people about the best way to manage gull populations, while at the same time respecting the fact that these are species that are under attack, they're declining in population, they're protected under law, and we should be finding a better way to coexist.
Thank you. I now call Craig Hoy to be followed by Fergus Ewing. Up to 4 minutes, Mr Hoy.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And as we prepare to take flight, can I congratulate Douglas Ross on bringing forward this important debate. As colleagues right across the chamber have referenced, the menace of seagulls has been getting steadily worse in communities across Scotland, and as a South of Scotland MSP, I represent a wide region that includes many coastal areas from Eyemouth and Dunbar in the east to Stranraer in the west, and many of these coastal and even inland towns and villages are experiencing serious and growing issues with gulls. These birds can be large, aggressive and very territorial, larger now than in the past because of their ready access to fast food on many streets. And Eyemouth has seen multiple gull strike victims. One local business saw 7 children attacked in 1 month, and they were left with gashes to the scalp and blood running down their faces. So this is a real problem, and residents and businesses report to me and many parliamentary colleagues the problems that they're facing, from noise to damage to property to direct attacks. And children, older people and tourists are particularly terrified when these take place. And I've heard, as many have referred, people who are changing their plans, changing dog walking routes, or even changing the way they access their own homes because of the effects, particularly during nesting periods. So my colleague Douglas Ross is right, as ever, to raise these concerns about the recent shift in the approach taken by Nature Scott through its licensing regime. The reduction of approximately 75% in licences shows just what a seismic shift its new policy and guidance is having. And this change is leaving many communities with limited options to manage the issue, and it has definitely contributed to the increased number of gull-related incidents across Scotland. The licences are essential for local authorities, for landowners and businesses who are trying to protect public spaces, retail areas, residential communities, and also, in many instances, the local economy. And the sharp drop in approvals has caused real concern to many of my constituents, and there is now, I think, a growing frustration that Nature Scott is not fully reflecting the views of those who are directly affected when they're assessing applications. In East Lothian, for example, in towns like Dunbar and North Berwick, they are facing relentless problems during nesting season. I've heard from residents who feel under siege, who are rightly calling for a more robust and practical use of licences to tackle the scourge of gulls. Problems, I think, as Mr Ruskell made clear, can be made worse by residents' behaviour. For example, in North Berwick, where one resident feeds the seagulls, causing huge disturbance, noise and the inevitable mess for neighbouring properties. And apparently East Lothian Council is powerless to be able to intervene. As Finlay Carson said, in Dumfriesshire, the issue has been particularly persistent, as anyone who visits Dumfries will see, by the gull that permanently sits atop the statue of Robbie Burns. Dumfries and Galloway Council is spending its full £84,000 in gull control budgetary measures into 2023-24, investing in nest removal, gulf-proof bins and deterrents on buildings, but still these are not working. And I think this serves to show just how serious the issue is and how much Nature Scott must listen to local communities, because these council budgets are now being fully utilised. It would be unfair for Nature Scott not to represent the views of our constituents. And I don't speak today to demonise the herring gull. Gulls, properly managed, are every bit as part of coastal life as the fishermen at beaches and fish and chips. But it is a problem that needs to be addressed, and I do look forward to hearing from the Minister what the Government will do to take forward these concerns, because they are concerns for communities that we represent, and it is about protecting people, public health and local economies, and we should not shy away from taking the serious and necessary steps needed to keep our communities safe.
Thank you. Just to advise the Chamber, we are very tight for time. I am going to have to restrict later speakers to 3 minutes, as well as extending the debate. I call first Fergus Ewing, to be followed by Brian Whittle. Up to 4 minutes. Mr Ewing.
I thank Douglas Ross for bringing forward this debate and for the joint working that we have done, and for the Minister for his engagement. Gulls behave naturally, but they are a menace. They're a menace to humans. A swooping gull, a gigantic creature on an elderly person with poor balance, if that person falls over and breaks a hip, either his mortality is reduced to 18 months or he may be housebound. Infants in a pram or a buggy who get guano droppings on their hand or near them will put it in their mouth. This causes all sorts of disease: histoplasmosis, cryptococcosis, psittacosis, ornithosis, salmonellosis, E. coli, and I've given the official report the spellings. These are potentially lethal. Minister, what survey analysis has been done by Nature Scott or the health sections of the Scottish Government as to the health risk? I'm very serious about this. I believe there's been no analysis whatsoever. If so, and there is a fatality, this Government will be held responsible for that fatality, because they haven't looked into it. Similarly, under Section 4 of the Regulatory Reform Act 2014, I know it because I wrote it, there's a duty on all quangos to take account of the economic impact of their decision. The economic impact of the business improvement districts is they have to pay tens of thousands of pounds. Instead of improving business, their role, they're having to sweep up the mess for Nature Scott. But the real problem, as I mentioned to Mr Ruskell in my intervention, is this: that I have met, incidentally, with Nature Scott several times. We've been in lengthy correspondence, and I'm fortunate to have had sight of a lengthy Freedom of Information response a constituent got. Now, I can't read it all out, and I haven't got time, Presiding Officer, but summing up is this. It has been constantly asserted by Nature Scott, and the Minister, understandably, has to rely on advice that he gets. That's to a certain extent true. But once he reads the response of the FOI, he will see that there is no reliable data for urban gull population. In fact, there were repeated requests in 2021, 23 and 24, I could read them out but I haven't got time, for that data, but it never came. When raising it, officials asked the JNCC, a UK government, they said, unfortunately, this has been raised again by an MSP. What on earth are officials expressing a view that it's wrong for an MSP or a parliamentarian to raise a concern? They do that repeatedly, Minister. So there is bias behind the scenes. The system is fundamentally flawed. The summit should be chaired by an independent person. It should be open to the public. It should have presentations from Lorraine McBride and Lucy Harding and others who have done sterling work but who shouldn't have to do it. Minister, I do profoundly believe, as you know, I'm not saying this just to make any effect other than to solve this problem in Scotland. That's what we are here for. The system is defective and flawed from top to bottom. It needs to be completely redrawn, and Nature Scott should have nothing to do with the issue of licences, because they have a clear conflict of interest between that responsibility and their responsibilities for conservancy of species.
Thank you, Mr Ewing. I now call Brian Whittle to be followed by Beatrice Wishart. Up to 4 minutes, Mr Whittle.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I thank my colleague Douglas Ross for bringing this debate forward? And I was listening to the interaction between Douglas Ross and Christine Graham there around the terminology used to, well, as a troon boy myself, and having had the great pleasure for 30 years of doing my morning run along the beach with my dog, I can assure you that dive bombing is a very, very good description of what gulls actually do. And fortunately my dog was smart enough and big enough to take care of herself, but of course I'll give way to Christine Graham.
Christine Graham, very briefly.
Dive bombing is a description of an action. Terms like menace is applying a characteristic.
Brian Whittle.
I think I would just say it's a very apt description of what the Gulls were doing and have been doing for years and years and years. But can I start off by really acknowledging that there is a balance that must be struck when managing nuisance birds and managing the conservation and the wider impacts to the ecosystem. But we also must recognise there is an inherent risk to people and property as gull numbers increase in human-populated areas. In my constituency, I do recognise there are councils who are better at managing nuisance birds than others, and some face different challenges in this area than others. East Ayrshire Council's Seagull Management Plan is used as an example of good work by SEPA. However, it does not mean there are no seagull-related issues within East Ayrshire, and even the best councils have limited tools at their disposal. I have a constituent who moved to Kilmarnock in 2021, in his own words, and I quote, "spent a considerable amount of money on this property, including the back garden area for the benefit of my grandchildren. The last 2 summers have been ruined with the council's inability to do something about these birds and the pests that they have become. My rear garden has become a no-go zone in the summer due to the constant swooping when the young girls are born and the constant large amounts of toxic bird waste being deposited over my garden area. I realise these birds are protected, but in doing so, then the Council and the Scottish Government must be responsible for the impact they are having on residents' lives." In raising this issue with the Council for my constituent, the Council have told me that the Council has no statutory duty to take action against the gulls. It has no statutory powers to enforce the changes in behaviour needed to make a meaningful impact in these situations. In fact, it said it cannot stop people from feeding birds, but they do try to encourage responsible feeding and offer education to that effect in the cases that are brought to their attention. It also has no legal powers to require other building owners to follow the hierarchy of controls referred to by Nature Scott before ultimately applying to them for a licence to remove nests and eggs. This is an action of a responsible property owner. The approach to gull management needs to change to a proactive whole-system approach, working with residents, businesses and property owners who each have a role to play. Councils and businesses not only need the ability to get a licence for control measures, as my colleague Douglas Ross has laid out, councils also need more powers for enforcement where the building owners and occupiers are documented and not managing their premises responsibly. Gulls are traditionally associated with the sea, and my constituent lives inland, so the only reason the gulls are there is for a food source. Their natural behaviour and environment has changed because of human interaction. So unless councils are given greater enforcement powers along with the powers to manage the population, these issues will just persist and grow. And I hope the Minister will address these key issues in his response. And can I once again thank my colleague Douglas Ross for raising this important issue. Deputy Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Whittle. Due to the number of members still wishing to participate in the debate, I'm minded to take a motion without notice under Rule 8.14.3 to extend the debate up to 30 minutes. I call on Douglas Ross to move such a motion.
Pleasure to move.
Thank you. The question is that the debate be extended by up to 30 minutes. Are we all agreed? That is agreed. I call next Beatrice Wishart to be followed by Liam Clare. Up to 3 minutes. Ms Wishart.
Sorry, I missed what you said. Was that 3 minutes or 4?
3 minutes.
3 minutes, OK. Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I thank Douglas Ross for bringing this debate to the Chamber this afternoon. As the motion states, gulls can be a problem, even dangerous. Very often, behaviour is heightened during nesting season when vulnerable eggs and chicks need protecting. I've witnessed and experienced how gulls behave quite intensely during nesting season. One gull in my neighbourhood attacked anyone going near the communal waste bins. I saw another fly at an unsuspecting man as he got out of his car. The large gull swooped, its beak made contact with the man's head and drew blood. He was quite shaken by what had happened. I've had my own gull experience, albeit a few years ago now. I'd hung out some washing to dry. I attempted to retrieve it on that fine sunny day, but having been dive-bombed by a gull, I only managed to bring the washing in by clutching an open umbrella over my head and making a dash for safety as the gull had another go at me. I fear without my brolly, I too would have ended up with a gash in the head. And while it seems amusing to retell the tale, there is a serious issue. I believe Nature Scott must do much more to issue licences swiftly when there is evidence that there is a situation of possible harm to humans. Presiding Officer, the Scottish Seabird Centre's briefing pointed to the fact that 70% of Scotland's seabird species are in decline. We know this is from the impact of climate change, invasive species and a reduction in natural food sources. I've lived in a top-floor flat for over 20 years. When I first moved in, I frequently heard the noisy call of herring gulls as they padded across the flat roof. They would fly down to the nearby seashore, pick up small crabs, starfish, sea urchins, and fly back, dropping their catch to break it open on the roof before landing to feed on their meal. They would nest in the chimneys on a nearby row of terraced houses, but interestingly, I don't see or hear them so often now. RSPB highlight that herring gull numbers have almost halved since the 1980s, and with readily available food from human waste, gulls are brought increasingly into our urban areas. Gulls hover outside fish and chip shops in Lerwick, waiting for a feed, and it's not unusual to see gulls sitting on top of parked cars while inside their occupants eat their fish suppers. I would also reiterate the advice not to feed the birds, not least because it can attract other wildlife. Gulls are acting naturally in an environment that we have built, and it requires us to change our behaviour so we can live in greater harmony. So to conclude, while we can mitigate against some human behaviour, Nature Scott must be more proactive in reacting to evidence-based situations when licences are sought. The agency cannot give less importance to the safety and protection of humans than they do to gulls. There is a balance to be found. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call Liam Kerr to be followed by Christine Graham. Up to 3 minutes. Mr Kerr.
Officer, I'm delighted Douglas Ross has brought this motion today. You see, since being elected in 2016, I too have been inundated by concerns from constituents about screeching gulls dive-bombing elderly and small children in particular for food or territorial reasons. In Aberdeen, the council receives around 200 complaints and inquiries every year about gulls, most of which concerning aggressive behaviour, noise and damage to buildings. Just last week on School Hill, I saw an enormous gull squared up on the pavement, refusing to budge, facing off against an elderly woman, eyeballing her food. She was terrified. And Aberdeen's Marshall College, the second largest granite building in the world, has sustained structural damage from these birds. And I must correct Mark Ruskell's unevidenced assertions about numbers. A 2015 University of Bristol study showed the number of urban gull colonies in the UK and Ireland had more than doubled to just under 500. 2017, The Independent reported the number had nearly quadrupled, and that's 8 years ago. It would be huge by now. Presiding Officer, I first started trying to find solutions in 2017. No, I don't have time, Mr Ruskell. I saw then that the Scottish Government had commissioned research as long ago as 2010 into the use of falcons to displace nesting gulls and other actions, including egg and nest removal and egg oiling. House of Commons in 2016 suggested seagull-proofing buildings, councils issuing gull-proof bin bags and educating people. At the time, former Edinburgh councillor Nick Cook was advocating funding de-nesting. Now, more recently, Aberdeen has tried a hawk. Aberdeenshire is trialling
an animal looking for easy pickings. So language such as mugging, menace, can be applied to us, our fellow counterparts, but it's not appropriate to demonise an animal simply looking for food. Anthropomorphising is tempting but not helpful. And in part, we brought it to this by ourselves, as we recognise we're a mucky creature. And unlike the gull, we know the consequences and should take responsibility for them, dropping our half-consumed chips, sandwich packets thrown to the ground, even when there's a visible waste bin nearby, or there are waste bins not regularly emptied. They should be. We fill tips with the detritus of our lives. If you were a gull, you'd be tempted. Don't get me wrong, they can be intimidating, and I do recognise there are serious instances. I, of course, think if you are where regularly and historically gulls nest, then you must keep your distance and respect nesting birds, who quite rightly are fierce defenders of their young. I was dive-bombed on the Isle of May. The correct use of a word, I say to the member, because it is not demonising. It is an action. Dive-bombed on the Isle of May during the nesting season. Now, that was completely my fault, my ignorance. So what do? Well, you modify our own behaviour. We've mentioned all the things we do wrong. Don't feed them, for example. Choose methods to constrain and restrain that cause least harm to these animals. You might provide alternative nesting sites. Perhaps that's why the stonemasons were being attacked. Here in this Parliament, we've used trained hawks, which have been in the main effective, though I do recall seeing gulls mobbing one and seeing it off, never to be seen again. But it was possibly being mobbed because we have nests on this very site. So I have listened, and there have been legitimate issues and concerns raised, and we must look at legal ways to control specific areas and humanely the gull population. So I look forward to the response from the Minister. But what we mustn't have is people versus gulls, or gulls versus people. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call the final speaker in the open debate, Rachel Hamilton, up to 3 minutes, please.
Thank you. And can I thank my colleague Douglas Ross for bringing forward this very important debate. As many have said today, it's an issue that we've been talking about for years and absolutely nothing is getting done, and I don't believe that the government are listening to us, because the issue continues in my constituency in Eyemouth. Aggressive seagull behaviour continues to cause a real concern amongst businesses, amongst tourists, amongst everybody that has anything to do along the harbour. And it's not just a seasonal nuisance. It's a serious growing health, it's a risk, it's a safety risk, particularly for children, elderly residents, as Fergus Ewing has stated. In September last year, we were told that 7 children were attacked within 1 month in Eyemouth, with 1 girl left with gashes to her scalp and blood running down her face. One resident described the situation as people being scared, attacked and traumatised, and said it's actively deterring customers from her business and the town. We found ourselves in a situation where we tried to plan ahead. The community got together. I had very supportive councillors, Councillor Carol Hamilton, Conservative councillor, and an SNP councillor, Councillor James Anderson. And we all got together in preparation with Nature Scott to try to do something about this. But of course, the can was kicked down the line, nobody took it seriously, and Nature Scott started to suggest. Jim Fairley shook his head when my colleague Liam Kerr said that the suggestion was to use dogs. It's absolutely in this. I'm going to say it first, if you don't mind, Mr Fairley, then I'll take your intervention. So it says the applicant intends to try the following. Nothing entered by applicant. Other solutions that have not been tried. Disturbance by dogs. The reason that they haven't used dogs is because they don't have nests on the ground. And while I made the point last week, do we expect spaniels to scale scaffolding, or do we expect dogs to go on drones? I'll take the intervention.
Briefly, Minister.
When Rachel Hamilton raised this last week, I have to say I was absolutely appalled at the fact that you'd mentioned, or the member had mentioned the fact that there was dogs to be used on roofs. So I made an inquiry to Nature Scott to give me a response to that. And the response has come back. We have not suggested or provided instructions that dogs should be used on rooftops to scare gulls and prevent nesting. Dogs can be an effective tool to deter ground nesting gulls, and the dogs are used in every licence application response as a possible means of deterrent, because they're giving they're giving people across the board deterrents, not just in that specific instance.
Rachel Hamilton, I can give you some of that time back.
Well, thank you very much. But we've been working closely with local residents, and my point is that the licensing scheme is bureaucratic, but it's also unrealistic, Mr Fairley. And I would really appreciate if you could look at the red tape that he could look at the red tape that was associated with businesses and the timescale, because we suggested a pilot. A pilot would have been absolutely perfect, that would have dealt with the bespoke issues that each and every town that's having issues with the gulls across Scotland is having. I mean, if I just give you a snapshot of where I am with how I've tried to represent the views of my constituents. In December, I hosted a site visit with Nature Scott to show them the worst affected areas around the harbour. I've held multiple meetings with Nature Scott to explore and seek advice on the licensing application itself. I secured Nature Scott's endorsement for signage to discourage public from feeding gulls, and I've also convened discussions with Scottish Borders Council, who are now preparing a draft gull management plan. Much more needs to be done on this, and I don't believe that the issues are being taken seriously. When I highlighted last week, Mr Fairley, that within 24 hours, Nature Scott had U-turned and they had granted 2 licences. That was only because I stood up here and highlighted that to the Minister. So I think a lot more needs to be done, and we need to support the people who are having trouble with the gulls. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Hamilton. I now invite the Minister to respond to the debate. Around 7 minutes, Mr Minister.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And I'll try to get through everything, but there is an awful lot to get through here. When I talked about the fact, as Mr Ross had talked about the fact that he was having a debate on gulls, people chuckle and they laugh. It seems like a funny thing. It's not. It's deadly serious, and I absolutely accept that. And I hope that Mr Ross and Mr Ewing accept the fact that I have taken this position very seriously right from the start. I met with them both on the 15th of April to talk about the gull management issues in Inverness and Moray. I then had a meeting immediately after that, on the 23rd of April, with NatureScot to discuss these issues. I then had a meeting with Nairn Bid and Inverness Bid and Highland Council on the 7th of May to make sure that we were progressing the issues. I now understand that we have got area-wide licences in Inverness and Nairn at the moment. We're still engaging with Moray Council to try to get a similar approach to that as that's in Inverness. And NatureScot has been attempting to engage with Aberdeen Council. So far that has been unsuccessful, so I would urge Aberdeen Council to engage with NatureScot so that we can actually get some resolutions for the issues that we're talking about. In terms of the rationale for licensing, the licences that are given for dealing with gulls are based on the clarification of the NatureScot guidance, because Mr Ross has talked in the past about why has the licensing changed. The licensing hasn't changed, but the guidance has, on the basis that the use of language, and this is really important now, the use of language, menace or nuisance, is not a licensable purpose. And that's a really critical part. And I will come back to possible solutions later on. But that use of language is very important. They can only be issued on the basis of health and safety, which is why there has been this differentiation since previous applications and the applications that we currently have. And I'm well aware of that issue, and we will pursue it. Now, I appreciate the frustration that people feel because they're not getting the licence and the bureaucracy around them. And Mr Ross has actually asked me to intervene. I think it is using Section 11 of the Natural Heritage Scotland Act, which allows ministerial directions. But we've delegated the responsibility for licensing to NatureScot in order to have them make the decisions. If we go against... Mr Ross. If we go against the licensable purposes, we could be open to judicial review, so therefore it would not be appropriate for ministers to get involved under the current provisions that we have, and I'll happily take an intervention.
Douglas Ross.
Just because he's on the point about ministerial direction and the licensing element of NatureScot, does he accept what's in the motion and what members have reiterated today, that there is a clear conflict between NatureScot's responsibilities to conserve bird numbers, but also to look at the applications to control bird numbers?
Minister, I can give you the time back.
Well, I am more than happy to have a wider discussion. When we come to the resolutions of what this debate will actually deliver, I'm more than happy to have a look at all of the issues that have been raised with us. As I say, Mr Ross has asked me to look at the role, or my role, in how we define the licences. But we have delegated that power to NatureScot, and that is where it should stay for this moment in time. But we also have to work out what it is that's causing the issue in the first place. We're feeding them. It's quite simple. We are creating habitat and we are creating feeding stations which are allowing gulls to inhabit our space. And that is now quite clearly coming into conflict. I think Beatrice Wishart's point was absolutely spot on, very, very balanced, as was Brian Whittle. That conflict is there, and we now need to find some way of coming to a resolution about that. We've got to try and limit food waste and public littering. We've got to take away these feeding opportunities. I dispute the fact that taking away those feeding opportunities is about starving the birds. It's about dispersing their behaviour so that they go to other places. We hear about landfill sites that have been closed down. Those used to be feeding places. Those are no longer available. So Christine Graham's absolutely spot on. The birds are having an issue about where they're getting their food source. We've created that food source and we're creating nesting sites, and that's the issue that we have to focus on. I'll take the
Rachel Hamilton.
Thank you. I think Jim Valley is slightly missing the point here, because if he takes the time to look at the reasons for refusal, he will realise that Nature Scott have already stated and have evidence that the people who are having troubles have already carried out all the management deterrents, from the food waste issues, the preventing of the old nests, the hawking by birds of prey, etc. I think we need a summit. I don't think we just need a summit in Murray. I think we need a summit across Scotland. Minister.
I haven't missed any points at all. I've stated right from the outset, I am taking this very, very seriously. There is absolutely no doubt. We've heard from members right across the chamber that the people are being injured, they're being attacked, and this is something that we have to deal with. But in terms of the gull numbers, Mark Ruskell was talking about the gull numbers. D Ward has a tweet on his timeline, and he says the red-listed herring gull seems to be bucking the trend in Dundee, but those 9 birds are sitting on top of rubbish bins which are feeding them. So I'm going to continue to make that point, that we have a joint responsibility to work out how it is that we are creating an environment which allows these birds to thrive in our communities, and how we're going to manage that going forward. So, after, I will very quickly take another intervention.
Fergus Ewing, briefly.
I'm grateful. Will the Minister address the point I made, that the whole basis of the restriction and licensing was that Nature Scott argued, I believe wrongly, that the populations of the 2 species concerned that I named were in decline, when in fact there is no evidence. Will the Minister, if I send this to him, study the FOI responses, which prove, I think, beyond any doubt, Minister, that there is no evidence that the populations are in decline, and what he wrote to me in his letter of the 12th of June is therefore simply incorrect, and this whole business is proceeding on the basis of a false assertion by Nature Scott.
Minister.
At this moment in time, no, I don't accept that. When I've got definitive proof that that is the case, then I'm more than happy to look at it. And I am more than happy to look at it. Have I got time to take this intervention?
Give you the time back. Mark Ruskell.
Would the Minister also acknowledge, though, that while there may be some very limited increases in populations in some urban areas, what we're seeing across Scotland is a decline. That is why this species is on the red list, and we have to take our international responsibility seriously if we're going to continue to protect the species in law.
I also disagree with that point, because it's not small increase in numbers in urban birds. The figures that I have seen show large increases in the number of urban birds, but absolute crashing numbers in their natural environment. And that goes back to the point that I made right at the start of my contribution, that we've got to stop feeding them, stop creating the nesting spaces, and find ways to displace them to go back to that natural habitat. So, in conclusion, Presiding Officer, I'm already over my time. I am more than happy to take this issue very, very seriously. I've already said that I will convene a summit in... I'll announce today, and my officials will make sure that it gets done, that it will be in Inverness. And when we have that summit, all of the issues that have been raised in this discussion will be raised, and we will look at the entire issue. In terms of us taking our responsibility, that is me taking the responsibility as a Minister who takes this very seriously, and I'll make sure that we try to progress this so that we're not standing here in 10 years' time with another members' debate about gull species. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister, and apologies to colleagues for having to constrain the debate, but we need to allow time for staff to come in and turn the chamber around before afternoon business begins at 2 o'clock, and on that basis it concludes the debate, and I suspend this business until 2 o'clock.